afternoon, and thank you for being here. The reason for calling the press briefing is to inform the population of St. Martin through you about an important meeting that the Council of Ministers had to chart the way forward with the entire issue with the Dutch government as far as the aid is concerned. One of the things that I want to again emphasize is that neither William Marlin nor the government of St. Martin ever rejected aid. The government never said, no, we don't want to accept aid. When I was in Parliament last week, Thursday, I made it abundantly clear that we need aid. We cannot do it alone. We have accepted emergency aid already, and we will accept aid. What we had an issue with were the conditions that the Dutch government had placed on St. Martin. In a letter of October 20th, which I am sure we have shared already, back then, we informed the Dutch government about the position that we have taken again. And I can recall reporting that Minister Plasterk had called me on the Sunday to say if he interprets my letter well, because he read it that the government is rejecting the aid. I said, absolutely not. The letter is written in Dutch. You can understand the letter very well. What the letter is what the letter has said. So again, I reiterated, we are not refusing aid. We are objecting to the conditions because they had nothing to do with aid. Having said that, I also announced both in Parliament and at the press briefing last week that the government was receiving, I think at the press briefing, I think I said we were receiving or we had received. But in the meantime, we have received the advice from our Council of Advice on the draft integrity chamber legislation that we had presented. One of the things that they had pointed out to government was that the protocol was used in the case against the Dutch government before the Council of State, for which we had a ruling on July 6th in The Hague. And they said, based on the protocol as well, and when you take into consideration the decision of the Constitutional Court, the Constitutional Court did not reject certain things, which were that the Dutch government would nominate a candidate, the St. Martin government will appoint a candidate, and both candidates would nominate a candidate to the Kingdom Council of Ministers, who by Kingdom decree would then be appointed. Also, the reporting to the Kingdom Council of Ministers was already agreed upon, was part of the protocol. So in their opinion, it's an agreement that the governments had made. So St. Martin should actually stick to the agreement. The Council of Ministers had a meeting, and we had decided to write the new State Secretary, particularly because he has indicated that he is hopeful on an agreement between St. Martin. The governor of St. Martin was in Holland also, and discussions were held. So we have sent 2 letters, one to the Kingdom Council of State, because as you would know, in the ruling of July 6th, it was agreed that St. Martin would do its utmost, at least the government of St. Martin would do its utmost to have the integrity chamber legislation completed by the 31st of October, which is tomorrow. But in the event we do not have it completed, we should report to them by November 1st what progress had been made. Now, shortly after the hurricane, I wrote both the Dutch government and the Kingdom Council of State. I wrote them a letter explaining that we had already prepared a draft, that the draft on September 1st was sent to the governor, that the governor sent it to the Council of Advice here on September 3rd. They received it on September 4th. The hurricane came on September 6th, and well, that information, but as you know, on September 6th, the office of the Council of Advice was destroyed. The office of government was severely damaged. The Prime Minister still doesn't have an office. The Council of Ministers still don't have a meeting room, and most of the offices upstairs, most of the top floor, particularly on the side of the Council of Ministers, is still very much compromised. But immediately following the hurricane, there was no functioning. The Parliament building was also not functioning. Parliament had to have the opening of Parliament here, and other Parliament meetings were held here as well because of the non-availability of a room that they can use. So we explained that because of all of this, we will not be able to meet the deadline of October 31st. So since the decision was, or the agreement was, that we would have to report back by November 1st, we are reporting back in the letter explaining the actions that we would take, and actually the intention of the government is to have the ordinance, the adjusted ordinance, presented to Parliament by the middle of November. One of the things that we had discussed during the hearing is that government cannot bind Parliament to a date. Government can say, we will ensure, or we will make sure, or we will do our best to have it presented to Parliament on such a date. I'm not saying that Parliament will not cooperate, but I'm saying we cannot bind Parliament with a third party and say, we will make sure that Parliament. Only Parliament can make a commitment for Parliament. We can't make it for Parliament. I'm not trying to stir up any controversy. I'm just saying this is the way things go. So the decision had been taken. Now, what is it? So as far as the Integrity Chamber is concerned, we have agreed to make the changes to reflect the possibility, not a possibility, to agree that the Dutch government will appoint someone, that the Kingdom government will also nominate someone. We also pointed out that in the protocol that was signed on May 24, 2015, the Integrity Chamber would be for a limited time. So it would not be something in the form where they would appoint people that it would last forever and ever. The draft back then, or the agreement back then, I think said for 4 years, and after 4 years it will be reviewed, and if necessary it can be extended with another period of 3 years. So we've indicated that we are willing to accept that it would be for a limited period. As far as the issue of the border control and customs, there too we said, well, hey, it's part of the protocol that was signed in 2015. As a result of the protocol of 2015, there is this flex pool agreement where the Dutch government would make border control officers, which are the maréchaussées. They have been here for several years now, and the strengthening of their presence could be expanded on. So basically we are saying we already have a protocol in place. We will agree to add more marechausses. We will also agree for them to make customs officers, Dutch custom officers available, but at all times we must ensure that the constitutional integrity of St. Martin remains intact, which is that these are things that fall under the responsibility of our Minister of Justice. So that is basically the position the government has taken, the decision the government had taken, and that has been communicated to the Dutch government and to the Council of State. Also, one of the things that we intend to have is in the middle of November that we have a conference, a sort of a working conference in which we can then work out the details of the aid, how it will be packaged, who will on the part of the Dutch government, who on the part of St. Martin, how it will be done. Because the interesting thing is that from one end it was being said that St. Martin this, St. Martin that, St. Martin that, but what St. Martin communicated was in writing, was clear, and I reiterate again, we have never said we do not want aid or we won't agree to accepting aid. We have always said the conditions placed by Holland were not fair. The conditions had nothing to do with aid. We already had agreements on border control. We already had agreements based on the ruling of the Council of State, that we already had a decision as far as the integrity chamber is concerned, and we were carrying out the decision. So now, because of the hurricane to suddenly sideline it, that is what the criticism was about. The new state secretary seems to be willing and flexible to have a discussion, because that's another thing I have indicated in my letters and in my discussions with Minister Plasterk, that the St. Martin government is willing and ready to hold talks. But their position then was, no, if you don't agree, we are not talking. So that is what has created the situation that developed over the past weeks. And the impression was being created and orchestrated that, hey, Marlin don't want to cooperate, Marlin don't want aid, and the people is like, well, what kind of government that is holding the people hostage over pride. Has nothing to do with pride, has to do with defending what you believe is right. As I said, we have the advice from the Council of Advice. We respect the advice given by our Council of Advice, but we also know, and we've known it all the time, the focus has to be on the people of St. Martin, on rebuilding St. Martin. But it was, interestingly, damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if the first proposal that was made and said, this is what we want, and you had said yes to it, the headlines by the same critics would have been, the government of St. Martin sold us out, and they immediately agreed to the conditions. So what kind of government that is, because tomorrow, if the Dutch government say, we want your government building, we're going to give it to them too. If they say they want to control Front Street, we're going to give it to them too. And if they want to control, we're going to give it to them too. So our position had been clear, and technically our position has not changed in terms of we were willing to accept aid, but the conditions we were not in agreement with. But now with the advice of our Council of Advice and with a new state secretary who said, hey, we are hopeful that we can work things out with St. Martin, all in the interest of the people of St. Martin, that is what the government has decided to do. On, I think it was Thursday last week, While I was in Parliament, I had a phone conference with Ms. Yolita Budkevicienne. I always have difficulty pronouncing her name, Yolita. Yolita is the director, the EU Director General of Development Cooperation for Latin America and the Caribbean. I discussed with her several things. One, I asked her if funding is available, because the EU funds programs and projects on St. Martin. You hear us talking about the 10th EDF and the 9th EDF and the 11th EDF. So far we have approvals for the 10th EDF, which is the sewerage project in Dutch Quarter, and the 11th EDF was the sewage project, a joint sewage plant for the French and the Dutch side. And so I discussed with her the possibility for extra funding because of the hurricane. She said absolutely yes. The EU will make additional funding available. One of the things that she said, we can immediately use the funds that the 10th EDF, because those funds have not all yet been used because the project has not yet started. It was tendered twice. It went unbid, and the bids were too high. And sometime a few weeks ago, we had the project retendered, and it appears now that more than one contractor had written in. I believe it is 3 contractors. So we seem to have a breakthrough there. But she said, if St. Martin wishes to use those funds for recovery funds, we can immediately access those funds. I told her that we rather not, because the Dutch Quarter project, the people have been waiting for so long, and it would be unfair to them to use those funds for recovery projects and let them hanging again. That should be part of the building back better and the rebuilding of St. Martin better. The 7 million for the 11th EDF, so we went on to discuss any other funding possibilities, and she said yes, they will make funding available under the special ARDF program if St. Martin would cooperate with the French side. So if it would have to be a joint cooperation project with the French side, and I told her absolutely yes. Definitely, because given the circumstances that we are in, both French and Dutch side, I will definitely subscribe to that. And she said that's the best thing she's heard since the hurricane has hit, and she will immediately start working on it. The following day, I got in touch with the president of the collectivité, Mr. Daniel Gibbs. He was still in French Guyana, where they had a meeting, and he said he would contact me upon his return, because I told him I didn't want to, have a statement about it, issue any press release about it, and then he would be reading something in the newspaper that was not discussed. But I thought, nonetheless, that it is important to let the public know that we have agreed to possible joint projects. A joint project could, for instance, be the cleaning up of the Simpson Bay Lagoon, because there are many boats on the Dutch side, there are many boats on the French side, and if we tackle it jointly, the EU, that would be possibly one of the projects that they would fund. We can also look at road network. The access between the French and the Dutch side is through Oyster Pond area, there by the border, at French Quarter, in Marigot, Cold Bay, and over at Lowlands. But if you have an access let's say between St. Peter's and Agremont. There are different places you can think about, but creating a new access road for the flow of traffic between Dutch and French side is also a project that would qualify. Brussels is busy looking at possibilities, and of course, at the local level, the French, I'm sure, would agree as well, that once we have our technical people get together, work out things, we can then put that forward. We also have the regional envelope, as they call it, 40 million euros, which is for the regional projects that have been in discussion for some time. Next month in Bonaire, we have a meeting. In November, we have a meeting in Bonaire, and the proposal is that we will propose to the meeting that half of that money, so 20 million euros, would be used for disaster recovery. The hurricane recovery, it's not only St. Martin that is an OCT, there are other EU OCTs that have been hit as well. So there too, extra funding will come from. And there is one more possibility, I think, that we had discussed that we can look at to get funding. One of the questions that I also asked, because it is something that has been coming up, and I asked her if the EU has made funding for St. Martin available via the Dutch government, and she said absolutely not. She said any funding for the hurricane recovery will be channeled directly between Brussels and St. Martin, like they always do. She said the only way the Netherlands will receive any funds on behalf of St. Martin if St. Martin would request that. But just like we do with all the projects, it is funding from EU to St. Martin, and there is no need for any intervention for that by the Dutch. One of the things that I pointed out also, I said, she would have to realize that it's a hurricane recovery, and generally the bureaucracy for a project funded by the EU is extensive. It takes long. A lot of bureaucracy. If you have a bid, people sign in, and before they finish evaluated, there's a minimum amount of time that it takes, something like, I think it's like 3 months before you get an answer. That's because of the different layers that has to go through, and it's not a local office. The regional office in Guyana handle these things, and then it goes to Brussels. So you have a lengthy time. And she said no, they are aware of that, and the intention is to cut the chase as far as the bureaucracy is concerned, because they understand how severely hit St. Martin, Saint-Martin has been, and it is their intention to do their utmost. In the meeting of Parliament last week, we have had, government did not get an opportunity to respond, but some of the things that several members of Parliament were talking about was that, hey, people want relief, when is the relief coming? And what we have pointed out in our discussions, even in coalition meetings, we have pointed out that what you do not want is for anyone, but particularly the Dutch, to say tomorrow, you see why we can't trust them with our money, because look how reckless they're spending their own. And when we say reckless, we are not saying that the government would do any reckless thing, but government has already approved a certain amount of money that will go towards assisting people who have lost their roof and would need assistance. But everybody would basically say, hey, I need assistance. Even the people who have insurance would tell you that I did not get enough. Other people have insurance, but if your deductible is $20,000, or $15,000 and the damage is $10,000, you've paid your insurance, but the insurance can't help. So that person would have to go to the bank to find $10, $15, $12, $13,000 to take care of their repairs. And some of them do not have that flexibility or possibility because, hey, they have commitments that are running. But before you can take a decision as to who you will help, a simple thing, if government says, for instance, we will help all senior citizens, senior citizens in the sense of all people who have reached, let's say, the age of 62, since the pension age now is 62. Everybody who's 62 and older, and you have damage, government will put back on your roof. We will get an awkward situation because you would get, for instance, Minister Gibson, who can build back his house without government's assistance, would qualify. His roof was damaged, but then government would have to put back on his roof because he falls in the category of 62 plus. While there might be somebody who's 50, is unemployed, and needs help. But then government says, yeah, but you're in a pensioner. So you need to clearly define who will get, who qualifies, and how much is the maximum government would give or honor with conditions. Now, some people would say, yeah, too much craziness, just go out there and put on roofs. But you just cannot go out there and put on roofs. The other thing, one of the things that we have discussed, we talk government, but you have ministers. The Minister of Romi is responsible for cleaning up. The Minister of Education has her responsibilities. The Minister of Finance has his. And in this case, it falls under the responsibility of the Minister of Social Affairs and Labor. So that advice would have to come from the Minister of Social Affairs and Labor. One of the things that we discussed in the Council of Ministers this past week was, up till now, no announcement was made that people who have lost their roof should come to the government building to register if they would need assistance. And the minister said yes, it was kept, no announcement was made. And it was like, how can we properly monitor how many people out there? Because if it's only people who took the initiative to come, when you start, then you're going to find out, because you have, let's say, 100 people who came, okay, there's only 100 people. And when you start to put on roofs, then more people are going to show up and say, but how come you give me an opportunity? And, well, you never came. And the person will say, but you never said the possibility existed. So there are some things that need to be regulated. Between the Minister of Romi, who is assisting now as well in terms of the evaluation of the condition of the homes and what would be needed, because social affairs would have to look at the criteria and the income of the family to decide whether they qualify or not, because then you can be accused of, hey, government took up taxpayers' money and was out there putting on their family and their friends' roofs, particularly given the hostile environment that St. Martin finds itself in now, that everybody's on social media and you have difficulty sometimes sifting through what is real news from what is fake news. So these are some of the developments that have taken place, and I wanted to share this with you and with the people of St. Martin, particularly because the deadline is tomorrow, and particularly because people are wondering, is the government really rejecting aid? And I can't, I can't see for the life of me why people would still want to believe or suggest that the Prime Minister and the government of St. Martin has rejected the aid, because we have never, ever done so. Thank you. Anybody have a question?
Yes. Something not clear to me, Prime Minister.
Something what?
Something is not clear to me, that's me, okay?
Okay.
So maybe you will explain. Will the government now follow the conditions that the Netherlands have put there, as far as the integrity chamber is concerned?
In the letter, we are saying we agree to, because our Council of Advice stated that the agreement, the protocol, was an agreement between the governments. The government of St. Martin executed that agreement in 2015. The government drafted an integrity chamber law that was sent to Parliament. Parliament approved it, and the Constitutional Court rejected it, but did not reject it on all the points. It rejected it on 2 or 3 points. So the ruling of the Council of State in July was, come with a new ordinance, take into account the ruling of the Constitutional Court. In the new draft that we have made, we have not included provisions for the Dutch to appoint anyone. What we have done is, we said it will be the people to appoint and make binding nominations were our Court of First Instance, our Ombudsman, and our Audit Chamber. So our own Council of Advice is saying, no, that is not in keeping with the agreement. You have an agreement, and the Council of State, in their ruling, say follow the decision of the Constitutional Court, follow the outcome of the Constitutional Court, and you have a protocol. Well, they didn't mention the protocol in this many words, but at least our Council of Advice is saying, no, you should. And what I've said, and I've said that in Parliament also, I said the decision on legislation is a decision that has to be taken by Parliament. An agreement between 2 governments cannot be binding on Parliament. What we have in the past is all 4 parliaments, the Dutch Parliament, Aruba, Curaçao, and St. Martin, had agreed to a draft for the dispute regulation. And the Dutch government said, no, I don't take orders from an agreement you guys made. I have my own responsibility, and I'm making my own proposal that I will send to the second chamber to establish. And that is why there has been a fight up till now about it, that there was no agreement on it. But in this case, and I'm saying I don't want to muddle up things to confuse people, because then people might say, so what the government is saying? The government, no. The government will include the agreements that were there in 2015 that the Constitutional Court did not rule as unconstitutional. One of the other things, for instance, the Bob Witt Commission had suggested that the Integrity Chamber, because Bob Witt Committee is the one that suggested the Integrity Chamber, and the Bob Witt Committee is the committee that the government installed to do the integrity investigation. They had suggested an Integrity Chamber. They suggested an Integrity Chamber, and they had suggested that it be a High Council of State. In the draft that the government sent, that the government had sent to the Council of Advice, it was proposed as a High Council of State. However, we were advised, actually, no, that will be in conflict with the Constitution, because the public will not be able to access the Integrity Chamber because they do not have access to a High Council of State. So it should be established simple by a national ordinance.
So
And-
now the
and-
Integrated Chamber shouldn't be a problem
Um,
anymore. Between Marlin and the Netherlands.
Well, based on the proposals that we have made, or the decision that we have taken today, we do not see what other issues the Dutch government would have with it.
Prime Minister, I just have other questions. First, you said that government had approved an amount already to assist persons in the community. Can you kindly indicate what that amount is?
I can have that amount for you in the morning. I don't know the amount, because it's not something they approved today. It's something that was approved before, but the proposal had to be worked out, and the policy had to be presented, and the Minister of Social Affairs did not present the policy as yet. It's the same thing we have approved. I think it is, I think it's either 1.5 or 3 million. I think it's a 1.5 million guilders, an additional 174,000 that was contributed by one of the other agencies, and that is to assist people, because there are people who are going to fall short and are already falling short. So since the policy to expand or the decisions to expand the social welfare recipients has not been finalized, it was agreed and signed off on by the Council of Ministers that the Ministry of Social Affairs have access to 1.5 million guilders, and I think it's 174,000 from some other agency would be included in that to give the so-called vouchers that people can go to supermarkets with. In discussing it with the supermarkets I think were willing to give a 10% discount to the recipient, the holders of a voucher. But what you had was, the decision initially was to, with the vouchers you can only purchase controlled items, so items that are controlled with price control. But then people were having problems, or not people were having problems, but it would create a problem, because there are certain important nutrients that are not in the package of price control. Or a simple thing, if toothpaste is not part of the price control, then you're telling somebody, government is willing to assist you, but we won't allow you to buy a tube of toothpaste or a bar of soap, or we won't allow you to buy some detergent. So basically, and the supermarkets were saying, but wait, if we got to go sift through when somebody come to shop with a voucher, that we got to go sift through and say, this you can pay for, this you can't pay for. The supermarket would have a backup of traffic, and government then decided, no, you know what, let's simplify it. We will, because when you give somebody a social welfare, you have no control over what they're going to do with it. So if end of the month somebody gets 600 guilders, 700 guilders, you don't know whether they're using it to buy gasoline, whether they're using it to try stretch it in the casino, whether they're using it to buy a cigarette, whether they're using it to buy a case of beer. You don't have a control over it. So why should we now go and add more bureaucracy to people in time of need? So that was taken out. So we hope this will be executed in the coming days as quickly as possible, as part of the immediate relief that certain families would need and require.
And my second question, Prime Minister, so just to be clear, your meeting with the governor this morning, was that to update him on the current situation as it relates to the Dutch government and aid and the Integrity Chamber?
Yes, the governor and the Council of Ministers meet quarterly, but we also meet in between sometimes on certain important issues. The governor and myself met upon his return from the Netherlands, and we discussed the developments. And today we had a meeting which included the governor as well. So that was that is what the discussion was about. One of the things that I think is good also to mention, the Karel Doorman, as you know, came in, and that was the last trip of the Karel Doorman, but it's not the last trip for emergency relief, but it's the last trip of Karel Doorman. There are other things that are expected to arrive from the Netherlands. We've received, I had the Chinese Vice Consul was visited me, I think it was on Thursday as well, but last week I was the entire week in Parliament, so the information did not get out. But the Chinese Vice Consul came and on behalf of the Chinese government made a donation to St. Martin of $105,000 US to assist government in the recovery. For people not to get the wrong idea, he did not bring a little bag of money, neither did he walk with a check, but that money will be transferred to the account that government had opened, and that transfer is supposed to take place this week. I also have the Beijing Sustainable Development Foundation. They have also made a contribution. They're looking at raising additional funds, but we have a 40-foot, a 20-foot collapsible container. After the press briefing, I can share the video with you for you to see what it looks like. But rather, if you have a 40-foot container, it takes up exactly that, let's say, on a boat. But this one folds up like a folding chair, and a container can carry 12 of them. When you open it, in 4 minutes, you have a container that has a door, a window at the front, and a small window at the back that you can use as emergency, temporary shelter, temporary homes for people who have to go through a longer rebuilding process. Someone who just got to put some zinc on their house and they're back in by the end of the week or 2 weeks, they would not necessarily need one, but one that has probably to wait a couple months before their house is rebuilt. Now you would say, well, what happens if the family is a bigger family? If it's a bigger family, you put 2 of them next to each other. One would serve as the living room, dining room, kitchen, and the other one would serve as the sleeping quarters with the shower and bathroom facilities. They have agreed to at least pay for the first container, which includes 12. In my discussions with the Charlotte Brookson Academy, they have a problem that the temporary school that you see down here across from the auditorium, they're short of 1 classroom, they don't have any storage and no office. So I had promised them so when I showed them, I asked them if they would be able to use this, they said yes. So I have promised them that when they arrive, we will make 3 of them available to them. But we are looking into probably ordering more of them. In the discussions that the Minister of Vromi had with the Dutch team that was here, the housing expert had discussions with the minister about what is popularly known as the IKEA, the IKEA home, which is basically it's I don't know the exact size, But they are the ones that arrived on the Carol Dorman. He had agreed with the minister that it would be 500, and then after he left, they decided to, I think, cut down the order to 50. 22 seemingly arrived before, and another batch arrived on the Carol Dorman this week. Now you can imagine the predicament if the minister had been telling people temporary homes would be coming, and if he was expecting 500, now get 50. But the Dutch said, well, they first wanted to see the suitability of it, and if it works out fine, then more can always be added to the order. So there are a lot of things that have been happening. There's a lot of progress that is being made. The Red Cross, some people have asked, and I think in Parliament also the question was asked, and we didn't get the opportunity to respond to it. What about the 13.3 million euros that was raised in Holland? The money was a fundraising campaign carried out by the Red Cross. And if you know how the Red Cross operates, they do not, and that was the whole question about tarpaulins and hurricane relief. If the Red Cross has 2 houses, they won't give them to government to give out. They will pick the 2 people or the 2 families to receive it. If they have 100 tarpaulins, they go in the districts and they do it themselves. So in this case, the 13.3 million that was raised by the Red Cross, the Red Cross is deciding how they will use that money. I had a discussion with the head of the delegation from the Netherlands Red Cross that was here, and what they have said is they have earmarked a certain amount of that money to put roofs back on homes, that they would target the most vulnerable groups, the seniors and most vulnerable groups. So here you have actually government that is kind of going after the same group, and the Red Cross that is going after the same group. I don't think the amount the Red Cross would earmark would be sufficient to cover all, but it's a matter of sitting with them to make sure that we are not duplicating, that you give, because some of the people they have indicated would just get a voucher to purchase, go by a hardware store and get the material, and some other people would get material, and they would select a contractor and say, okay, how much you will charge to put that roof on, and if it's 5,000 guilders, they write that contractor a check for 5,000 when the job is completed. So while there's a lot of concerns that nothing happening, if you want things to happen properly, because here the Red Cross has the money already, was raised for it, but it takes time for you to properly dispose of that amount of money to avoid someone saying, hey, things were done wrong over there. I recently got my Roku back up and running because the internet was back up, and since the local cable TV was not on, so I switched to the Roku and look at some news. And if you see, not that I'm saying, boy, we're better than them, but if you see the news reports on Puerto Rico, that it is still devastation. The people are going down to rivers to wash clothes because they have no water, that people do not have food, that people do not have even tarpaulins on their roof. When I was in Miami with my wife, who had to do surgery there because Puerto Rico could not accommodate her, I realized that the cost of a car rental was more than double what we normally pay. The rate at the hotel was like double of what you would normally pay. And I was like, there's no holiday, what is this about? So when I asked somebody at the car rental company, he said, no, it's because of the amount of Puerto Ricans who have left and have come to Florida and they're renting cars. Some of them are renting a car and driving up to New York with the family. Others are going to Atlanta. Others are staying in Florida. He says, so, while we complain here, for instance, of price gouging, but that has created price gouging because it's supply and demand. There's a great demand, and in the news report that I was looking at on the news channel, it was 83,000 Puerto Ricans have gone to Florida. It didn't say how many have left from Puerto Rico to go to New York, or how many have left from Puerto Rico to go to Atlanta. From Puerto Rico to Florida, 83,000 have left because of the condition. And I think St. Martin has done remarkably well when we compare where we are 8 weeks after the most devastating hurricane in this region in history. Yes, there are people who still are traumatized because when it rains, they cannot cover their home. And by the way, let me make use of this opportunity to say that another batch of tarpaulins have come in, so I'm taking the liberty to tell people to contact government if you need tarpaulins, because it would be shameful and regrettable that people out there would need a tarpaulin, whether you had one before, and because it was not properly put on the roof, or because of the rain, it sagged and it started to leak, anything like that. Government has a large amount of tarpaulins that just got in, so feel free to contact any minister. Feel free to call me if you want. Come to the government building. There are a large number of tarpaulins.
And my final two questions, Prime Minister. I'd just like to know what is the status right now of the governing coalition, because of course you have one of your coalition partner, Mrs. Westcott Williams, indicating that she's being stifled. What is the status of the coalition right now?
What I can say officially, there is no information, at least reaching me as Prime Minister, that anyone has withdrawn their support from the coalition. It is unfortunate that one takes, if you have a coalition chat in which information is shared between members of the coalition, that you would take something that was shared on that chat and then make it public. I can imagine if one says, well, hey, nobody can tell me what to do. And I saw also that in the statement, it was said that the Prime Minister did not, I can't remember the exact words. Did not what?
Reach out to her?
No, the Prime Minister did not, I guess, condemn the statement made by someone. A member of the coalition said something to the effect that who is not in agreement with the Prime Minister should quit the coalition. And when I saw it, because I don't have time to constantly be monitoring things that are said, because there's so many chats. There's a chat with the Alliance Board, there's a chat with the Alliance candidates, there's a chat with the Alliance faction, there's a chat with the three leaders of the coalition, there's a chat with the Council of Ministers, there's a chat, and there's a chat. There's so many chats. So when I saw it, I did not respond in the chat. I responded to the person who had written it, and I told them, that's not really the way to address something. What you also have is, if somebody has a concern, you respond in a coalition meeting. You say, hey, listen, I don't like this, I don't like that. If somebody made a statement, if you want to to use it, to make a public statement, hey, that's everybody's good right. But to respond again directly, no, there is no official notification, at least not to me, that there is any party, individual, or faction that has withdrawn from the coalition.
Have you reached out to her though? Because she said that no one from the coalition, particularly you, reached out to her on her concerns. I mean, if a member of the coalition...
We were to have a meeting every Monday morning. We have a meeting, and this morning I suggested that the three leaders would meet before we have the bigger coalition meeting, and she responded that she could not make it because she had to go to a radio program, and then afterwards she said she did not go to the radio program. If we can meet at a particular time, I think it was 11, I couldn't then because I had a meeting. I didn't see it until after, and then I asked her if the three of us can meet at 4 o'clock. She said, yes, no problem, let her go to Parliament, she'll be back. And I've waited until I came down here to the press briefing at 5 o'clock and didn't hear from her as yet. Go ahead.
There was a lot of concerns expressed after members of the National Alliance and some of the United St. Martin Party walked out of Parliament during the meeting, including yourself. What sparked...
Including myself? I don't know. You see, Facebook and social media, one of the things that I've said all the time, in 1995, we didn't have social media. In 1995, we didn't have Facebook. In 1995, the governing face was the governor. The governor was in charge of the country as the person in charge then. So politicians, let's say, don't get no bragging points, don't score if you punch up on the governor, because the governor is not a politician and you can't get votes from him by beating up on the governor. You might lose votes because people might feel, hey, you're not being fair to the governor. But politicians have a tendency to take shots at each other, some of them, regardless of the circumstances of the country. Some of them will tell you, we are not playing politics on this, we are reaching out to the government, and then 2 days after, send a letter condemning the Prime Minister and actually lying, because the things that they say, they accuse the Prime Minister of, and I addressed this already Wednesday in the press briefing, are absolutely false. It is customary that members of Parliament go to their office, some walk downstairs, some leave when somebody else is speaking. People who know me would know that I often go to the restroom. During any meeting, I would leave to go to the restroom, and sometimes you walk outside and you chat with a member of Parliament, or you chat with somebody in the public tribune, or you go and answer a phone call. I never left the meeting. I went to the bathroom maybe twice, possibly 3 times. They're saying there was a walkout. At the start of the meeting, the MP Samuel, I think, left. I don't think he was there for no significant amount of time. In the course of the meeting, MP Franz Richardson had left the meeting. When I went to the restroom, the second or the third time it was, MP Matzer was outside, and we were talking, and then I came back inside, and then at one point, I see another MP left, and the chair lady said, there is no quorum. It is not the first time that that has happened in Parliament. What is remarkable is whenever the persons that were not there, that caused a quorum not to be met, if it's members of the National Alliance of the USP, it makes the greatest headlines as if they are the biggest culprits in the country. They go on social media and they beat up, and it becomes news. But check the records of Parliament, how often meetings are not held because there is no quorum. But what is remarkable, whenever the quorum is not made, can you recall when one of the MPs, I think, was arrested, and we were handling the budget, and all members of the UP were there and did not sign in? Now, what is worse, being present and not signing in, or people, because if there's a walkout, the faction leader would do so, and everybody walks out. But the faction leader had left from before. Franz Richardson had left. I don't know where they were. I don't know whether they were in their office. Most likely that's where they were. I don't know. But now to say also the Prime Minister left. People send me things because I don't have any Facebook. I don't go on Facebook. But people screenshot things and it's like, oh, school children say. Because that's the new norm. The school children say, the school children say, the school children say. Now if you get a party that has a machinery that goes out there and say all kind of things. I went to Miami with my wife to the doctor. The Prime Minister was in Las Vegas. My son was arrested for looting. When people saw my son, they said, no, it's the one that came from Holland. The one that is in Holland is still in Holland. Then they say, no, it's only, but when the Prime Minister went to the police station and demanded to release his son, MP Irion came with a motion to suspend the Parlatino, attending Parlatino meetings so that Parliament can, in a show of solidarity with the people of the day, and unfortunately, mainstream news use the fake news to legitimize it, to ask questions about it, and we can go back, for instance, with a whole, and I don't want to dig up old things, when it was said that the Prime Minister put containers by the border, blocked the border. My reaction was, me? I don't know anything about it. I drove down to the border. When I saw the container, I tried to contact the Minister of Justice. I couldn't. I could not have a situation where things are escalating and people are frantic about it. What did I do? I went to the garden, got a loader, went and moved the container. People posted. I didn't ask them to take no picture. I didn't went with anybody there. I didn't go with anybody there. People who were there were filming the whole thing on their cameras, on their phones. They posted it on Facebook. The Prime Minister moved the container. What the fake news writers say? No, it's the Prime Minister who put them there. And now he's pretending that he's with the people and he's going to move them. So whatever you do, and that is why I say also, the first, if you want to call it, offer that came from Holland, if that offer was what it was, we'll give you assistance, but these are the conditions. And the Prime Minister said, sure, we need assistance, we sign on to it. The headlines on social media would have been, what kind of government we got? They don't represent the people. Our constitution don't allow it. Then they would quote all those Dutch professors who have been saying, it is not right, it is not right. None of them is quoted. But you use, oh, the government is stopping aid from coming to the people. The government is stopping aid from coming. Ask any one of them today, how much will the aid be? Or what is it you're expecting to get? But you create a phantom, and the Prime Minister has, in my 39 years of involved in politics, and I've been a member of Parliament, a commissioner, an island council member, a minister, a Prime Minister, I have never taken blows like was thrown at me this time, and it didn't bother me. It didn't bother me because I know it was not true. It was not true, and it is something that would actually blow over, because what are you going to say when the houses arrive? What are you going to say when houses start to be built? What are you going to say when the roofs are fixed? What are you going to say then? Because the people who are hell-bent to complain. If you go and you put on a roof tonight, if I leave here now and go and ask one of the hardware stores, open up your lumberyard and give me some roof, and I go by Windward Roads and ask them to lend me some spotlights, and you get some rafters, you get some zinc, and I get some workmen, and we're going to be put on a roof. They'll find criticism because it was not done transparent, and they're going to tell you it's your supporter. Why did you pick that one and you didn't pick this one? You never will get out of it. So what do? I don't read it. I don't take it on. I put on blinders and do my work.
I just wanted to know, the DP leader said she's being stifled. I just want to know what is your opinion as a leader of the coalition?
No, there is no stifling. If somebody put in a chat, who ain't agree with the Prime Minister should leave the coalition. I do not know of any, because it was not a statement addressed to her. It said anybody who is not in agreement with the Prime Minister should leave the coalition. And I do not know of any public statement the DP leader made that said she is not in agreement with the government. Because the letter she wrote to the Dutch government said, asking the Dutch government to separate the two issues. And exactly this is what I was saying. I'm saying aid, yes, but do not use this as a condition. Different wording, but it's the same results. So there is no stifling. You have, for instance, the Member of Parliament, Perry Halings, has been lacing into the Prime Minister everything that I say. The government was not prepared, without substantiating how the government was not prepared. The Prime Minister don't want to take responsibility. Now, should I take responsibility for global warming that most likely is the reason why a Category 7 hit us? Should I take responsibility that the airport that was built to withstand, I believe, 150 miles an hour got certain damage? Should I take responsibility that Maho got damaged, Great Bay got damaged? Should I take responsibility? Should I take responsibility? Should I take responsibility? Criticism one after the other. But I did not go out there and pick a fight. Now I can imagine why the MP is upset with the Prime Minister. It has absolutely nothing to do with the hurricane. Absolutely nothing. I thank you.